Hi, good afternoon. Let me just slideshow this. Okay, so screen is okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'll be talking about legal aspects of telemedicine. So as we know, during the pandemic, there was fast-track digital transformation in all areas, medicine included. There was a lot of interest in telemedicine. But of course, even before the pandemic, there are already a lot of practices involving telehealth. So if we define telemedicine, it's, to me, the simplest definition is that it is practice of medicine over a distance. Okay, so there are different ways of practicing telemedicine. Merong synchronous. This involves real-time consultation, such as when you do a video consultation with a physician. There's a physician on one end, and there's a patient on the other end. There's also asynchronous telemedicine. This is usually what is done by the National Telehealth Center. So this, for instance, there is a doctor to the barrio in a remote location. And yung method na ginagamit is store and forward. So they would send and consult with a specialist, usually in the Philippine General Hospital, and would send pictures or laboratory results so that even if there is no specialist in a geographically isolated area, meron pa rin silang access to a specialist. Then there's telemonitoring. No? Ang usual na ginagamit na mobile health technology. There are a lot of wearable devices that would be able to monitor heart rate, temperature. So ginagamit yung telemonitoring, for instance, ICU care. So yung mga critical care specialists, they may be just in one area and they're monitoring a lot of ICUs from different facilities. No? Of course, mas common siya in other jurisdictions. Telemonitoring also for pain management, and monitoring of chronic conditions. So I think the doctor who wishes to start or the doctor already practicing telemedicine has to be clear. Alam niya, may plano siya how he or she intends to practice telemedicine. So for instance, ang gusto ba niya yung diretso sa patient, yung clinician to patient? Gusto ba niya he or she will only deal with another clinician, meaning gusto niya there is already a doctor with the patient and will just be consulting, such as, for instance, patients needing specialist care? Or will it be telemonitoring, no? Using wearable monitors and other medical technology devices? So, but whatever way or whatever means na gustong gawin ng doctor, it's important to remember that a doctor practicing telemedicine, once he or she is engaged by a patient and the physician accepts, then there is already a duty of care to the patient. Kahit anong klaseng telemedicine pa yung na-decide niya. But of course, because of this duty of care, it will be important to prepare. No? Hindi pwedeng basta go without understanding all the responsibilities and obligations and also the benefits. No? Patients should be able to understand the benefits of telemedicine. Imagine that a patient will be able to consult with a doctor without leaving the home. No? Sa panahon ngayon na pandemic, of course, it reduces risks. No? Why will a patient who can be treated by telemedicine want to go to a hospital or sumakay ng public transportation na palit yung distance, so all these things. No? So telemedicine greatly reduces these risks. Of course, the goal here sa Pilipinas, we want to institutionalize telemedicine as part of the healthcare delivery network because telemedicine has the potential to improve access to quality care. So now if we're talking about you setting up your own clinic, it will be important to prepare. No? This is a busy slide, but I'll go through the main points of this later. So there's the preparation, how you will set up your clinic, from choosing the device that you will use. Will you be using a smartphone? Will you be using a computer? How do you collect professional fees? Nakaset up na ba yung billing procedure mo? How will you receive payment? Who will be the people involved, and do they have enough capacity to assist or facilitate the telemedicine consult? Because patients, of course, will have to reach you. Paano sila magre-register? Will it be through a technology platform? Will you have a system wherein they have to book their appointments through your secretaries? Then that means the secretary will be part of the whole process of providing a telemedicine consult. Then sa practice mismo, there are a lot of considerations. Remember that in the current issuances of the DOH with both UP Manila and the National Privacy Commission, there's emphasis that patients would expect the same standard of care in a telemedicine consult as they would expect in a traditional face-to-face consult, of course, subject to the inherent limitations of delivering medical care through a distance. Then it doesn't end there. We have to be concerned about follow-up care. And because all this involves transmission of personal information, usually through information and communications technology, data privacy and data security become very important. So let me go through the main concerns. No? In the preparation, remember that because it's a change and you're implementing change, it's important to know who will be the people involved. No? A lot of times there's telemedicine, there's telephone telemedicine. Yung tinatawagan pa lang. No? Maybe your patients will be calling you and asking for advice over the phone. Maybe the patients will be calling your secretary. Okay, what kind of patients will you accept? No? What kind of patients will you consider as appropriate for a telemedicine consult? And if you are working with your staff, your secretary, and your nurse, how will you build capacity? These are all important considerations when you're starting your telemedicine practice. No? There must be a clear process where your goals are also clear. Then, of course, ang pinakabago sa telemedicine is because it's a new mode of delivering healthcare. And primarily because you're using information and communications technology. You might be using a technology platform. Maybe you signed up for a technology platform available in the market, or maybe your patient does not have access to this and wishes to consult with you via Facebook Messenger. Okay lang ba to? Okay lang ba yung security nito? And how will you set up your workspace? So these are important considerations when starting your telemedicine practice. Remember that just as with the use of any other ICT, and in fact, when you're processing personal information of patients, there are risks involved. No? Even the most secure system can be breached. Kung hindi nga ICT and you're doing face-to-face consult, you handle a lot of sensitive health information about your patients, then even more so, no? When you're transmitting information online, no? Your patients might want to send you lab results. Your patients might want to send you pictures of their wounds or pictures of their conditions. So there will be privacy and security risks. Dito sa book na to, yung technology risks na minention, quality of images, and suitable equipment and inadequate guidelines. Pero ang isa sa mga technology risks sa atin, of course, the connectivity problem. What will happen when you're in the middle of the consultation and suddenly umulan, nawala ng kuryente. So paano na ngayon yung consultation if it was caught in the middle? No? So in addition, there are human resource risks. No? Having these risks and understanding these risks should not scare you away from practicing telemedicine, because knowing that these risks exist means you can prepare for them. No? Halimbawa, well, maybe I'll be talking about it later, but just as a quick example, halimbawa na alam mo na yung possibility that there can be disconnections. Pwede talagang mangyari na mawala ng internet connection. Ano yung backup mo if that happens? No? So a lot of systems would involve already making sure that the patient can be reached offline, maybe a landline number, or the patient is informed of where to call the doctor, or meron ng plan. No? If the consultation is caught in the middle because of disconnections and the patient is really feeling something, maybe even before the start of the consult, the patient is already instructed on where to go. So these are some of the ways of managing risks. Okay. Then capacity building. No? Identify people who will participate in the process. Yung sinasabi nilang risks, for example, in telephone telemedicine, baka tinatawagan yung secretary mo, supposedly to schedule an appointment, and then the secretary might give medical advice, no, offhand, and that will be a problem. So you should know who are the people participating in the process, and they should be clear on their responsibilities. Ang maganda, meron ngayong mga online training on telemedicine. So everyone involved in the delivery of care via telemedicine should be aware, no? I think yung isa sa mga nakita ko, telephone, telemedicine, Harvard training, and you get a certificate. So there are capacity building activities available, and a lot of institutions like the National Telehealth Center and UP Manila are conducting a lot of or workshops even during the pandemic on telemedicine. Minimum competencies, communication skills. You should be aware, of course, of obligations under the Data Privacy Act, and you must understand the platform that you are using. So kahit naman sa regular, traditional face-to-face consult, communication skills are important. But now, when you're doing telemedicine, may iba siyang twist. No? Before, they will say you have to practice your bedside manner. Now, in telemedicine, sinasabi nila, dapat meron kang webside manner. How you'll be able to communicate. Like me now, kitang-kita niyo yung mukha ko. So the patient will also see the doctor's face and reactions. No? Kung may tinitingnan mo yung cellphone mo or nagsusat ka kung anong suot mo. The same professionalism, no? Expected of a doctor in a face-to-face consult will be the same expectation also, even if it is a virtual consult. So, I think ang pinaka-challenge, anong platform yung gagamitin ko? Okay lang ba yung Viber gamitin? Okay lang ba yung Facebook Messenger? Well, I would not recommend using these usual messaging apps, no? But if no choice, then you have to be aware of how you can secure your data and maximize the privacy settings in these platforms. There are also telemedicine platforms available now wherein you can actually sign up. No? May iba free, may iba bayad, may iba mag-uumpisa ka ng bayad sa subscription kapag dumami na yung patients mo. So sometimes the telemedicine platform also incorporates an electronic medical record. So you'll be put in a position where you have to choose which platform to use if you're a doctor intending to practice telemedicine. At the same time, for the patients, pipiliin mo din alin dito yung mga kaninong doktor ka magko-consult and through what platform. For the doctors, it would be good to look into whether the platform is actually complying with local laws like the Data Privacy Act. Meron ba siyang DPO na pwede mong tanungin about your security and privacy concerns? So it's important. Sometimes it's so easy for us to just tick that box and say, yes, we agree. But you have to read the terms and conditions. No? I've tried looking at a lot of the terms and conditions of the available telemedicine platform. So you should be careful because you want to know what they intend to do with the data that you may store in that platform, data about your patients. Make sure na hindi siya gagamitin for any purpose. And if it's going to be used for purposes like marketing or sending of emails by the platform itself, then the patient should be aware, no? Because that is not an expected that's not an expected purpose for the telemedicine consult. Okay. And then it's not all about technology or ICT. A lot of the preparation also goes into the workspace. Saan mo gagawin yung telemedicine consult mo? Imagine how distracting it would be if, for instance, a patient is disclosing to the doctor very sensitive info, then sa likod niya, may mga taong dumadaan-daan. No? In the same way that you want an environment that is conducive to trust and disclosure and building good rapport with the patient, even more so in a telemedicine consult. No? You want to make sure that there is privacy in the consultation, both for you and the patient. No? Sometimes, may mga telemedicine consults wherein you want the patient to be with someone na meron siyang guardian o meron siyang kasama. No? So part of the consideration yan lahat when you're starting or already practicing telemedicine. Okay. So in the end, no, you have to have clear policies and procedures. How the patient can contact you, what are the existing guidelines. You have to integrate the procedure for obtaining consent in the processes. No? Usually, ginagawa to. Yung iba, even before the start of the consult, they already obtained the patient's consent for telemedicine. Then you have to set up your billing policy and procedure. If can we charge for a telemedicine consult? Yes. Do some HMOs cover it? Yes, some HMOs already cover it. Is it covered by PhilHealth? But you know, I think they're already working on it. There are talks now, no, to have to include this in the primary care package. Pero syempre, ano pa yan, in the works pa. So you also have to have protocols in case of interruptions or disconnections. So during the consult, what are the important considerations? First, transparency. Transparency is important not only for data privacy purposes, wherein you have to inform the patient about how you intend to use his or her personal data, but it's also important for the telemedicine consult itself. Patients should be aware of the benefits and risks of telemedicine, and they should be given a chance to refuse a telemedicine consult. Yung doctors na nagpa-practice ng telemedicine na, alam nila minsan that some patients are not comfortable for a telemedicine consult. So hindi mo siya ipupush. Mararamdaman mo yun. Some still now, kahit ngayon, there's still patients who would feel na hindi sila na e-examine or parang hindi same sa traditional face-to-face consult yung treatment nila sa telemedicine consult. So you should be able to communicate well with the patient, and if the patient is not comfortable, then maybe telemedicine is not for that particular patient. So how do you practice transparency? Well, this can happen at the start of the consultation. You can inform the patient about these risks, or if you have a professional page, a website, a professional profile, you can already include frequently asked questions or privacy notices in that profile or website. Okay. Consent, no? Bakit required yung consent? In-adopt na siya ng mga guidelines ng DOH, and it's also part of best practice. So currently, consent for telemedicine should be obtained prior to the consult and for every interaction. So when you're using third-party platforms, sometimes the consent of patients is built in, no? Because once the patient signs up for the platform itself, they're already asked for a consent for the telemedicine consult as well as the use of the platform. You, as the physician, if you're the physician, you should be aware of what these patients are signing up for. No? Kailangan alam mo din ano ba yung consent form na pinipirmahan nila. Because if there are any other uses of their data that is not normally expected, it will be your duty to inform your patients that their information is being used this way. So even if there's already a built-in consent form, you can consider using separate consent forms. Maraming templates available. Again, the UP Manila has provided templates for telemedicine. It's available online. So how do you go about this? No? Yung iba, pwede naman yan. Isi-send mo sa patient beforehand. They can sign it, take a picture, and send it back to you. What's important is part siya ng process so that you don't forget about the importance of consent. Kung gusto mo, kung separate consent siya at wala pang consent, for instance, in platform. Okay. As to data privacy, remember that under the Data Privacy Act, same as with a traditional face-to-face consult, you generally can process personal information, even sensitive personal information of your patients, like health information, without consent if the purpose is medical treatment. But for all other purposes, then it will require a separate consent. No? Consent should be obtained if you're doing video and audio recording. Kung hindi medical, because telemedicine is also an opportunity to do research, consent of patients should be obtained for this purpose as well. Okay, then ano bang standard of care expected? Yung nuances ng DOH with other agencies, for these issuances of DOH with other agencies, they say that the standard of care is the same. Meaning you don't change the way you prescribe, you don't change the way that you take the history of the patient. No? You still rely on your own, the same medical judgment that you would exercise in a face-to-face consult. Pero ano bang difference? No? Because it's inherent limitations of telemedicine. Telemedicine, ang physical examination lang usually na kaya mong gawin ay visual and hearing. Maririnig mo yung paghinga ng pasyente, ma-examine mo siya. Usually, you may require assistance in the conduct of the physical examination. But, kailangan mo pa rin mag-deliver ng same quality of care. So, anong importante? In our jurisdiction, it says that if you think that you're not capable, once you accept a patient, it means you represent that you have the skill and the knowledge and the training to treat that patient's particular condition. So if halimbawa na feeling mo hindi appropriate ang telemedicine for that patient and that a face-to-face consult is necessary, then the patient should be so informed. At hindi mo na ipupush yung go to a hospital or needs further examination. So, challenge for physicians and also the specialty societies, you have to establish guidelines for patient selection. Which patient, what is your criteria for patient selection? Anong pasyente ang mga appropriate for medical care? For medical care through telemedicine. For instance, may mga iba in other jurisdictions, they only want to do a telemedicine consult for old patients, meaning patients that they already have a relationship with. Then of course, pagka new patients, pinipili nila ito for instance, for chronic conditions that will require long-term monitoring. So there must be guidelines, which is the most appropriate ones to determine which patients are selection can be developed, as well as guidelines for examination of patients. Pero hindi naman nabago. Halimbawa, when you talk about tele-ophthalmology, maraming mga technological devices that can even assist in the examination. Pwedeng mag-visual acuity testing na kahit via telemedicine consult. Pati nga yung mga, as I mentioned kanina, may mga wearable devices that can help in monitoring. So how you examine the patients, you have to be clear. Paano mo ba i-check yung breathing? Paano mo ba i-check yung lalamunan? So halimbawa ngayon, alam ko yung may ibang doctors, they would require the patient to be with someone so to help and facilitate in the physical examination. The physical examination in a telemedicine consult, remember that the patient plays an important role. Parang partner mo siya in the conduct of these examinations. As to the DOH NPC's memorandum circular, they also have some guidelines. So here, I just highlighted some parts as to the standards that you're expected to follow. Number one is that the physician is responsible for coordination of care. Of course, this circular was responsive to the COVID crisis, kaya meron silang gantong circular. So, coordination of care, this is the same duty na meron naman talaga yung mga physicians. May duty ka of continuity of care to your patients. Then, emergency and serious conditions, these are not appropriate for a telemedicine consult. Kung in the middle of the consultation mo na-realize na emergency and serious, then you should inform the patient. And kaya importante yung coordination of care, you should be able to direct the patient where to go. Ikaw pa rin ba yung physician niya o may kausap ka na, may ka-network ka na kung saan mo i-refer yung patient kung may kailangan na further interventions. Additionally, this guideline also says that you have to document, you have to keep records of abstracts and prescriptions. Yung sa prescription na requirement na you keep a copy, it's also in the issuances, the issuance of the FDA. Now the e-prescription is allowed. Again, it's responsive to the COVID crisis. So it's allowed for individuals vulnerable to COVID, but it includes those with chronic illness and persons with disabilities. So here are the highlights of that issuance. And I want to point out that it says that you have to keep records of all the electronic prescriptions that are issued. So itong mga e-prescriptions na to. So finally, kung importante ang documentation in the traditional face-to-face consult or when you're seeing patients in the hospital, di ba sinasabi nga, if it's not written, it did not happen. So it's similarly important in a telemedicine consult. Not to mention that specific documentation is required, for example, for e-prescriptions. You keep a copy of these prescriptions. Then you have to also document the consent of the patient for telemedicine. Okay. So final, na-mention naman itong mga data privacy, but the final tips on data privacy, remember to be transparent about data processing, collect only information that is necessary, use patient information for medical treatment only unless the patient consents to other purposes. You have to protect the confidentiality of the patient's information. You secure it against unauthorized access. Doctors that are using electronic documents and digital files should be familiar on the use of encryption. Paano mo poprotektahan tong mga documents na kinikip mo about your patients? Have backup of important files. and be ready to address the concerns of patients. No? Especially when you're doing telemedicine, patients might have privacy concerns. So you should be ready to address these concerns, and you have to be prepared in case of a breach. Remember, even if only isang pasyente lang, one patient's data has been compromised, that is already, if it involves medical information of the patient, that is already a reportable breach. No? You already have to notify the National Privacy Commission for it. Okay, so that is all for this part. Thank you.